I met Janet at the State Intelligence and Research Bureau. I was 22 years old then, and I was pretty weird. School always seemed boring to me, so I spent my youth immersed in Northern Virginia hacker culture. Of course, this made me unconventional, to put it mildly. I never studied computers as such. I just saw the world differently than ordinary people, and this unconventional view helped me notice things that most missed. This was helpful when I was looking for vulnerabilities in your security system. This was not strictly an electronic hack. In fact, I preferred social engineering, especially when it came to ID fraud. That's how I was eventually caught. I didn't do any hacking. I was sitting in the office of the Under-Secretary of State, smoking his smuggled Cuban cigars. What can I say? The secretary had excellent taste in real Cohiba cigars. However, I forgot about the acrid smoke that was spreading under the door. For me, it was a boyish prank. For them, it was a crime. What I liked about the GBR was that there was nothing I couldn't hack. So they gave me two options: go to jail or work for them. So a year later, I became a staff computer scientist in the current intelligence division of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. I didn't fix the system. I hacked them on orders. Janet was a financial analyst assigned to work at the SIR. She helped connect the dots on a specific problem the United States was having with a French diplomat. I believe the ultimate goal was blackmail. In any case, the project was not memorable, and nothing significant came of it. The only significant result was the appearance of Janet herself. She was so attractive that all the men in the SIR, and perhaps some of the women, wanted her. I was a humble little flower on the sidelines back then. Not that anything has changed, so I never thought about courting her. But the head of my department arranged lunches and dinners for her throughout the entire project, and it would be a miracle if he didn't sleep with her. I wasn't one of the alpha males, so I never knew for sure. My relationship with Janet was different. She was involved in financial analysis and often came to me asking for information. The hacking process often dragged on until night, and since I didn't even think about the fact that I had a chance, we communicated as colleagues and friends during all these hours. We both had a well-developed sense of humor, so we laughed a lot, and we spent a lot of time together, just talking or doing those everyday things that people who work together do. Is it not enough that I looked after her? But I am a botanist, and what I know about human nature can fill the 7 seas. On the other hand, I knew that Janet was a master ninja when it came to numbers, and combined with my special skills, we were a deadly team. She invited me out for drinks the day we caught the right person. I said, "Isn't Rick going to take you somewhere to celebrate?" She looked disdainfully and said, "We did it together, just you and me, not that idiot." There was some bitterness in her voice. I guessed that the storm in this particular teapot had finally calmed down. I may be a nerd, but I'm not a fool. If the most attractive woman in the entire State Department wants to have a drink with someone like me, I was already at the door and racing through Washington Circle to 1 fish, 2 fish before she could even put on her coat. She took a dirty martini. I am beer. She attracted all the attention of men. Most of them wondered what she was doing with someone like me. I don't blame them. Janet was gorgeous in dark Mediterranean style, but her eyes set her apart from other beautiful women. Her eyes were big, round, and sexy, but they were icy blue, like the Arctic Sea. The unusual contrast of color with her perfectly proportioned dark face was mesmerizing. Janet was also very smart. She had an MBA from Stanford and graduated from their business school when she was only 21 years old. But I'd be lying if I said the first thing I noticed about her was her intelligence. The first thing that attracts everyone's attention is her curvy body and large breasts. I'm not making excuses. I'm a man, and intelligence is a terrible thing for a man. I looked into her unusually blue eyes and said, "Do you want to talk about it?" I'm not particularly sensitive, but after 10 weeks of 60 hours spent with her, I knew there was something between her and my boss, even if he was married, and I assumed there were problems. She looked at me with a grin and said, "I thought we'd been talking about this for 20 minutes. But not now. Let's talk about something else. How about you and me?" I was puzzled. I said, "What about you and me?" "I know. I'm stupid." She looked even more amused and said, "You're the only guy in this place who hasn't tried to hit on me. What's the matter?" I didn't have an answer. I just looked at her, puzzled. I said, "Why would I hit on you?" She said, "What's wrong with you? Don't you like girls? Or do you have someone hotter than me hidden somewhere?" I said, "I have a studio apartment in Franconia and a cat. I like girls, they just don't like me." She said, "Why not? You're tall and good-looking. You're not a jerk, which is something I can't say about most of your gender. And you're a genius at what you do. In fact, you are very frightening to those who know how sinister your black arts are." Okay, she was starting to seriously make me nervous. Women like Janet don't even notice men like me. Moreover, they don't pay them compliments. What was she up to? I took an anxious sip and muttered, "I've never had success with women. I think it's a matter of confidence. But I'm also too introspective and completely introverted. Modesty, awkwardness, and tongue-tiredness are not the most attractive traits for most girls." She looked at me with her amazingly intelligent eyes and said, "I'm not most girls. We worked side by side for 2 months. I know that you are a social invalid. But when we are together, just you and me, you are funny, insightful, and very deep. Moreover, you seem to have a sense of values, and that is very important to me. I'm tired of fighting off men. Every one of them thinks he can sleep with me if he buys me a drink. On the other hand, you give me respect, and you treat me as a colleague and a friend. And honestly, I want to see where this goes if you're interested." Who wouldn't be interested in the smartest, and I might add, hottest woman in the entire State Department? Roslyn was much closer than Franconia, so we drove to it. She may be intellectually intelligent, but I also found that Janet is extremely adept at the more physical aspects of the feminine arts. Can you say, sexy animal? Simply put, she loves to have sex. She loves everything about this act. And all of her enthusiasm and passion is channeled into very creative ways to make us both happy. I'm a pretty calm guy, but Janet's passion and fantastic little body could even turn on an Easter Island statue. She never gets tired, there's nothing she won't try, and she's always ready for another round. We got married exactly 32 weeks after that conversation. Nobody believed that our marriage would last, but it lasted for 15 years. It turns out that opposites can attract. Of course, our marriage was not cloudless. We sometimes had disagreements, and they could be violent. We are both strong personalities, and each of us has our own opinion. Especially Janet, who has a Mediterranean temperament. I am German by birth, and so I often think quietly and gloomily, like Hamlet without a skull. But she explodes, and when that happens, she lets me know what she thinks. However, since she really loves me, these storms pass quickly, and the subsequent make-up sex is always very satisfying. If our life together seemed perfect, that perhaps explains why learning that things might not be as they seemed was such a shock. Perhaps there is a greater purpose, but no one saw fit to share it with me. As far as I can tell, life is simply a series of chance encounters that we weave into meaning through the decisions we make. If we choose wisely, the good usually outweighs the bad. But karma is a heartless bitch, and if you choose to live on the edge, sooner or later you will fall. As the old prison saying goes, don't do a crime unless you're willing to face the punishment. I was living proof of this. I found myself in Chicago one fine spring evening because conferences are big business. Every conference needs speakers, and I have some knowledge about the covert dealings in the so-called American war on terrorism. That's why I often receive invitations to speak. That's why I was sitting at the bar of Gibson's Steakhouse in Chicago. I was among the speakers at one of those terrible professional events where none of the presentations make any sense, but everyone leaves feeling informed. My topic was national security, why I sleep like a baby. Key point, don't babies wake up every 2 hours crying and peeing? You know what I mean, right? The conference was held at the Thompson Hotel, which is convenient for O'Hara. That's why I arrived late in the afternoon. The goal was to do my job and fly back early in the morning, pocketing a substantial fee for my services, by the way. As usual, I headed to the nearest bar. I hate air travel. That's why I like to have a beer or four when I'm on the road to calm my frazzled nerves. I noticed Gibson's across the street. The place was packed, but there was one seat at the bar. It was next to one type of parasite that I especially hate, but this was the only place available. If you spend any time in a swanky bar, you'll recognize this look. They are still young enough to be special in their own eyes. They just haven't lost enough to gain common sense yet. They are always alpha males, young, fit, attractive. Their style is impeccable and their approach is seamless. At school, they were among their own. They joined the best fraternities in college, and their diplomas are from the most elite schools. These two looked like tech support for some vendors participating in the conference. Most companies pay a premium to those willing to travel, and that usually includes a generous allowance for expenses. This is nomadic life, but if you're young and have no commitments, it can be fun for a while. Like all other representatives of this kind, these guys were always on the lookout. Their need for sex had nothing to do with warm feelings. These guys were only in the game for the score. Women were just prey to them. Their casual connections were like an addiction. Each conquest gave them a fantastic thrill, but they fell if they didn't keep doing it. That's why they were always on the lookout. I ordered a cold gamma ray pale ale. I'm into craft beer. This is my weakness. The bartender placed 18 ounces of this wonderful drink in front of me. He also seemed completely disappointed with my two neighbors. Apparently, they had been there for a long time. When I sat down, they were discussing the hottest girls they had met in their travels. Both of them were drunk. Therefore, unless I put in earplugs, I could not avoid their conversation. It was an insightful look into their world. They seemed to rank candidates based on appearance and sexuality. The most amazing thing was that they did not know any names. They simply used labels like redhead in San Francisco with big breasts or Latina from Orlando with big butts. It was like talking about animals in a zoo. The guy directly to my left was telling his companion about his latest discovery. He said, "The one who deserves my vote was a chick I met in Atlanta a month ago. I didn't sleep with her, but my buddy did, and he said she was the hottest chick he's ever seen. And he knows a lot about it because he had them all. She was maybe 5 or 2 tall, but her breasts were easily a D. They looked huge on a woman 6 inches taller, but on her they were huge." The second guy chimed in, "Yeah, I like them really big." Brilliant conversation. And remember, half the bar could hear these two drunken idiots. It was getting so bad that I was considering standing by the window, anything to avoid listening to them flatter each other. My neighbor continued, "She was with a guy I knew from school, so I joined them. They had dinner by candlelight. She was very quiet the whole time. You know how women can be submissive when they get what they want." They both chuckled vulgarly. I almost threw up. My buddy was one of those guys we really respected in school. He wasn't particularly smart in class, but damn, he was successful with the ladies. You know, the type completely dominant, and he liked to show off his power over the ones he took. I never saw it, but I heard he had a huge one in his pants. Some guys would be mad if you joined them when they were getting ready, have sex. But not this guy. Whit wasn't worried. He knew he had everything under control. He just wanted me to see what a stud he was. This was accompanied by vulgar laughter about what a stud he was. In the universe in which these two cretins lived, such a title was almost worth a Nobel Prize. The guy to my left continued, "We talked for a while, and I noticed she was wearing a ring. I even asked them if they were married. That made me laugh. He said, 'Janet is married, that's for sure, just not behind me.'" Suddenly, I tensed up. What caught my attention was the description of the woman and her name. "My wife is short, with large breasts, and her name is Janet." To make matters worse, she was recently in Atlanta with a guy named Whitley Reynolds. He was one of the lawyers she consulted for. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Maybe it was just a coincidence that Janet was a pretty common name, wasn't it? Now I listened to every word this idiot said. At this point, another guy interrupted to ask the narrator who they were selling for. This may seem a little strange, but the only thing these two idiots were interested in was sex and sales. Therefore, the question of a line of business was not so unusual. The guy next to me said, "She's not in sales. She's kind of an accountant, if you can believe it." It broke my heart. Janet is a consulting CPA. Both she and Reynolds were in Atlanta last month. They spent 4 days there, dealing with the affairs of one of Reynolds' clients. Meanwhile, the guy next to me continued to tell his friend the details. Apparently, his buddy Whitley had been trying to sleep with her for a couple of months. He said that when she finally gave in, she was a real beast in bed. The other guy, who was clearly more drunk, asked, "So, did he give you a try?" The first guy replied, "No way." He said she was madly in love with him, and she was so hot that he wouldn't think of sharing her with anyone else. I told him to call me if he ever gets tired of her. Damn it, she was incredibly hot. At this point, I threw a 20 on the bar and left the building. Okay, I admit it was an incredible coincidence. These two fools were just killing time in their usual lustful ways. But the world is always a small place, and the connection with such an unusual name as Whitley, and with the mention of accountant, narrowed the circle of coincidences significantly. So it wasn't impossible that I accidentally heard something I shouldn't have heard. The next 24 hours were tense, to say the least. Public speaking depends on stage persona. My thing is that I'm a good-natured guy with deep roots in intelligence, and that has served me well. But it's hard to convince a room full of people that you're just a gregarious country gentleman when all you can think about is whether it's possible that your beloved wife is a two-faced bitch. I've been working with audiences for so long that the actual 50 minutes on stage went as usual a mixture of laughter and vague information. But I was on autopilot. I was too upset. I didn't call Janet last night. I knew it would upset her. When we are apart, we always talk at least once a day. But I'm not even close to coping with my feverish fantasies yet, and I didn't want to risk letting her know that I suspected something. The likelihood of her being that bitch was slim, but even this possibility threw me off balance. It was really just random conversations. Most of the connection was in my head. And even as I listened to them, I realized that the narrator was exaggerating, as all teenagers do when they talk about the opposite sex. However, until I find out if Janet was the same woman, the situation will be at the forefront of my thoughts. And I knew I needed a plan. First, I have to act like our relationship is all clouds, rainbows, and unicorns. If Janet suspects that I suspect something, she will go on the defensive. And she's smart enough to hide any evidence of the alleged extramarital affair, so I had to be calm. I also realized that I was suffering from hot wife syndrome. Every man wants to be with the most attractive woman in the room, the one everyone else wants. But a woman like Janet could win over any man with her playful look. This can cause incredible insecurity in a regular guy like me. Your insecurity comes from the fact that you know that it is not your overwhelming animal charm that is keeping her around. She is with you because she chooses to be with you. The problem with choice is that the world is full of temptations and people can always change their minds. Therefore, no matter how strong your union is, you always know that your happiness depends on your wife's ability to make the right choice. After 15 years of marriage, I truly believe that Janet's character was beyond reproach, and that she will choose marriage over betrayal. In fact, in 15 years, I have never seen anything in her behavior that contradicted this assumption. She hasn't changed her behavior one iota. She was as loving and attentive as ever, and there was no hint of guilt or suspicious behavior. Thus, she is either a master of Zen compartmentalization or she is innocent of the charges. Unfortunately, however, the seed of doubt was sown, and it quickly took over my mind. As a result, I felt obligated to get to the bottom of the truth, if only to preserve my own sanity. It was crazy to overhear a casual conversation in a bar 700 miles from home, and immediately jumped to the conclusion that my wife was betraying me. But this is exactly what this new paranoia has led me to. What drives my reaction is the all-or-nothing stakes I have placed on our relationship. Marriage has many different components, not just sex. There is a social connection, in the sense that the other person is your most reliable friend. Your wife is the only person who will never betray you. Of course, trust depends on mutual honesty, and lying is the shortest path to destruction. Then there is the knowledge that intimacy between a man and a woman is exclusive. Losing this exclusivity will become a stumbling block in our marriage. I just wasn't ready to share Janet's special essence with another man. It's not about the male ego. I felt that we had a spiritual connection that could not include a third. If this were so, then our marriage would not be what I understood it to be. In my opinion, we must be a binary pair, or we have nothing. I thought I did everything I could to make her happy, and if I disappointed her in some way, I was ready to do anything to fix it. But she should have told me about her problem and not taken it outside the marriage. And if she somehow fell in love like those two idiots said, then she should have shown me respect and told me that she was no longer mine and not hide behind my back. Of course, giving it to another person would be a clear violation of our agreement, and I'm sure Janet knew this. The next step was obvious. I needed to figure out the whole picture. I returned late in the morning and took a taxi through GW Park from DCA to Georgetown. I knew that Janet was at work and would not be back soon, so I had time to prepare. I am a methodical person and very focused when I am busy doing something. Therefore, the first step was to collect all available data on Mr. Whitley Reynolds. I approached the problem like any other zero-knowledge attack. I am a hacker by profession, although in polite society I call myself a penetration tester. It's a special set of skills that I've been honing since I was a teenager, and I get paid very well for my abilities. But I also hack systems for personal reasons. This incident was personal. However, it was more of a crusade. First, I did a deep web search. It only took 20 minutes and cost $39 to learn more about Mr. Whitley Reynolds than he knew about himself. Most of the information was uninteresting crap that everyone has, like all the places he's ever lived and the names of all his relatives. The neatly typed report stated that he was married and had 2 children, a 4-year-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. He lived in Chevy Chase with a woman named Mary who was the same age as him, both 33 years old. He actually had a law degree, and he passed the Maryland bar exam on his second try. He worked in private practice for 6 years, and before that for 3 years in the Baltimore District Attorney's Office. There was nothing negative on his account, but this did not mean anything, since he was a lawyer, and lawyers know how to hide complaints. He seemed to specialize in financial services for select clients. His clients were regularly accused of wrongdoing. This data was amazing, but I suggested that having criminal clients wasn't too surprising, given that Reynolds was a criminal lawyer. And this probably explained his need for Janet's services, at least those services that were certified by her MBA degree. Other services didn't require a diploma, just her beautiful body. Janet worked throughout the 9 years of our marriage as a legal recruiter. Just like me, her skills could either help people or cause a lot of harm, depending on which side of the force she was on at the time. She could expose the most complex fraud scheme and also carry it out herself if she wanted. We both made a ton of money selling our knowledge. But there were many times when I wondered why we wear a white hat, since it would be almost impossible to catch us. I knew my motivation. I can't cope with the feeling of guilt. Therefore, I would be a bad criminal. I just assumed Janet was being honest for the same reason. But thanks to my recent epiphany, I began to doubt it. Maybe she was a better actor than I thought. I felt that I knew the nature of my prey, but I really needed to gain access to his computer in order to pin him to my personal honor board. It was already after lunch, so I saddled up my fully armed dog for a little war. Janet loves dogs. She loves them so much that she sometimes brings strays home. That's how I bought Buster. Buster is big and tough, and he slobbers a lot. He also looks very scary. That's why no one wanted to adopt him. I felt sorry for the poor fellow. That's why he's my dog now. There is no kinder, more loyal and loving being than Buster. But he's so impressive that I initially thought Janet accidentally saved the mountain lion. I took Buster's leash and his gear. It was a beautiful spring day in Washington, with only 99% humidity, so I planned to take a walk. Buster was very excited. He knew what we were going to do. To get into the life of Mr. Whitley Reynolds, I needed to gain access to his system. I could hack it. But this would require close proximity to create a connection. And most people are not happy when someone stands in their entryway while they ping the family router. I could drive by slowly, but standing outside would mean a range problem. 802.11 is not very powerful, and a Wi-Fi sniper on the roof of a car would be too visible. Therefore, the closer, the better. Since I do this for fun, I came up with a way of war driving that allows me to get very close to the target without arousing suspicion. I was able to do this because Buster is only slightly smaller than a pony, so he can easily carry a harness with 40 pounds of braking equipment. Of course, the casual observer would think I was one of those aging hippies who strapped his big dog to the water and a backpack for a walk. I installed a small but very powerful laptop in Buster's backpack. It worked with NetStumbler and several other common hacking tools such as Wireshark and Brutus. His harness was an antenna. I also added some special items that I received from a couple of my Ukrainian friends. What? Didn't you know that hackers practically invented the internet community? We could walk down any street, just a guy and his dog, and I could monitor all the home networks until I found the right router. I would then press a small button in the handle of Buster's leash, and my hardware would lock the target SSID into the evil twin. Once I deployed this malicious device, I owned their network and all its devices, and I could continue my 4G spying from the comfort of my home. We drove half an hour to the Reynolds area and both went for a walk. Buster seemed to know when we were engaged in war. He usually pulls like crazy, but when we spy, he walks slowly, sniffing everything. He even occasionally looks over his shoulder as if to say, "Are you getting the signal, boss? Or should I go slower?" Anyone who has a dog knows that they talk to you. Buster reminds me of the big black guy from the Green Mile. Anyway, when we got to his house, the equipment my war dog was carrying picked up the signal and connected it to Reynolds' router. It only took Brutus 30 seconds to hack their WAP, and I got a green light that said the evil twin had been configured and had replaced the home router's signal. My twin now ran the Reynolds network. I pressed the button, and the evil twin fell out of the harness. I bent down, picked it up, and casually threw it into the bushes in front of the house. When it lies in tall grass or bushes, its body is practically undetectable. We calmly returned to the car. Our work was done. It was 3 p.m. and Janet would be home soon, so I took out my special laptop. This is the one I buy from hacking sites with bitcoins, not money. Nobody in their right mind would buy something from dark hacker sites using their Visa. I confirmed that the Reynolds system was connected to the twin, open, and awaiting my tender ministrations. I didn't need to download anything since everything was there to read, but I still dumped their garbage into a file on my computer. People don't realize that their secret things don't disappear when they hit the delete button. I'll deal with this later. I also started mirroring any system activity from that point on, in case anyone is smart enough to actually clean things up. If there was something between Reynolds and Janet, I had solid proof. I just haven't found them yet. But I will find it. I also planned to hack my wife's phone in the short time between her opening the door and me kissing her. Then I was going to install the rat on her computer as soon as she fell asleep. In fact, at this time tomorrow, I will know everything she knows and more, because the entire personal life of her lover will be mine. Was this a morally bankrupt act? Absolutely, but there were two mitigating circumstances. First of all, I could do it. And secondly, no one would know. Sounds like a cheater's mantra. Undoubtedly. But I am not the one who allegedly cheated in the marriage. And as far as I was concerned, I owed it to both of us to get to the bottom of any suspicion of infidelity. For 15 years, Janet always came straight to my house, like clockwork. Unlike other working women, she never went out for drinks with her colleagues. I always thought of this little sign as a sign of how valuable her marriage was to her. So I almost felt guilty when I scanned her smartphone from the office and installed the Man in the Middle app. Then she entered the office. She is still so beautiful that it took my breath away. She came to my desk and hugged me. The kiss said she really missed me, and he promised how much she would show it later. She is a beautiful little woman, but it is her inner being that makes her special. Coquette Vaya is perhaps the best way to describe it. Even at 38 years old, she is still a stunningly attractive set of perfectly proportioned features, high-spirited, cheerful, and seemingly naively innocent eyes. As a couple, she's sunshine and well, I don't even know who I am. The word nerd comes to mind. Janet's boundless energy and playfulness have always made her the perfect complement to my slightly introverted nature, and we look great together in public. I never try to steal her light, and she never wants to be outside of his rays. Janet's flirting skills also fill in the gaps when we communicate. As a result, most people think she's a big flirt, and I'm too dumb to notice. I don't care about flirting as long as I feel our spiritual connection is strong, and I've never had the slightest reason to doubt it until now. She bought takeout sushi from Katabuki, laid out a few plates, and sat across from me, dividing the spoils. She asked, "How was the trip?" I replied, "Informative." She looked in surprise and asked, "How so?" I replied, "I learned something there that made me want to work on a new project. This is my top priority, and I will spend all my time on it until I solve it." She looked at me cheerfully, without a hint of guilt or worry, and said, "That's good. I know you always need someone to throw the ball for you to chase. Why didn't you call last night?" I looked at her. God, how beautiful she was. I said, "I've been dealing with some things that I can't tell you about. I don't want to talk about it until I figure it out myself." She said, still without a hint of concern, "Well, that's fine anyway. I worked until almost midnight on a project I'm doing as part of a collaboration with Whit Reynolds." These words pierced me with lightning anxiety. She continued to chat, not noticing my condition. She said, "I'm starting to worry about this whole situation. I think this is my last trip with him. He wants to go to Miami early in the morning for a meeting, and I'm going with him. But there are some things that just don't add up, and I can add up because I'm an accountant." These words were accompanied by a loving smile that lit up the entire room. My heart sank. I said, trying not to sound hopeful, "Then maybe you shouldn't go." Meanwhile, she was intently dipping a California roll into soy sauce. Did I detect a hint of hesitation? She said, speaking mainly to the roll, "I have a contract with him, and I have to make this last trip to fulfill all the conditions, so I have to go. But after this, I cut all ties with him." Was this a coded hint that she was going to break up with him as a lover? "And all the money I earn from this project, I will spend on our trip. I want to connect with you like we've never connected before, and I want that connection to be very deep, if you know what I mean. How about a cruise?" I continued the game. I said cheerfully, "We'll see when you get back." I was almost sure that this ship had already sailed. She clearly had some explaining to do. She digested my statement and decided that I was just being my usual dismissive self. Our lives were complicated, and the long cruise required planning. She said, her voice filled with urgency, "There's one more thing. My body has been yearning for you all day. So, if you don't mind, I need you to do something for me before we go to bed." Was it pity sex for the poor, uncomprehending husband? It didn't matter to me whether it was true or not. This was probably my last chance to make love with my only friend and companion, because tomorrow was a new day. She was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, but sometimes it seemed that half of her height came from her slender and graceful legs. She stood up gracefully and walked over to my side of the table. I woke up. She took my hand and silently led me to our bedroom. She was a small woman, but very muscular and round, and the sight of her buttocks swaying under her expensive alpaca dress and her full, round calves flexing as she walked in 4-inch heels pushed all my doubts about her fidelity to the back of my mind. When we got to the bedroom, she suddenly turned around and wrapped her arms around my neck, pressing herself against me. It was quite a gymnastic achievement considering I was significantly taller than her. Then we got busy love. When I finally came to, she was lying next to me, just staring at the ceiling as if she were a million miles away. I suddenly had a terrible thought. Is this the last time? Is this the end of my happiness? I decided that I was acting like a weakling. What will be will be. But tonight she was with me, and that was all that mattered. She turned and looked at me with a mysterious desire in her eyes and said, "I will love you forever. Promise me that you will be mine forever, no matter what." I smiled at her touching sincerity and said, "I promise." But I added to myself, "There are several reasonable conditions for this, my dear. For example, that you do not sleep with someone else." She settled down under the blanket and said dreamily, "I'm going to sleep now. I'm leaving early to catch my flight, so I won't be there when you wake up. When you wake up, just remember that this was the last time for me. I will never leave you again." Then she dozed off. I thought, with no small irony, that the choice might not be hers. I went downstairs and hacked her laptop. Returned upstairs, I brushed my teeth and went to bed. I knew I was behaving like a cunning scoundrel, but the stakes were too high. As I fell asleep, I thought, how can she be so unconditionally devoted to me and at the same time give herself to another man? I'm no genius in matters of the human heart, but there was no conceivable circumstance under which the woman I knew as my wife would do something like that. I don't care what the romantics say. A comfortable habit is the cornerstone of marriage. This is a pragmatic fact. You spend your whole life together. That's a lot of time to kill. Much of this time consists of small, repetitive activities that you do just to get through another day. And constantly clashing with each other does not contribute to marital harmony. Hence the importance of a smoothly running routine. She always showers first, and I shave. Then I shower while she gets dressed, and then I get dressed while she makes coffee. This has been the case in the Witcher household every working day since time immemorial, except today. Today she got up early and left the house before I woke up. The empty space next to me was painfully eloquent. I grabbed an energy bar and went for my morning run. I've been running all my life. I like to run 3 to 5 miles almost every day depending on my mood. The advantage is that after 38 years, I am still thin as a greyhound, although very tall. I'm probably also addicted to my endorphins. I took a shower when I got back. I freshened up and sat down to see what I could find out. There was a lot of junk on Reynolds' home system. The problem with mastery is that there is never enough information. The problem is that you have unorganized piles of it. Therefore, finding useful information is like finding a needle in a haystack. That's why you must have talent like me. First, I did a simple search of Reynolds' deleted emails to pull any from Janet. I found a whole treasure. There had been about 50 messages in the past 3 months, ranging from a contact message requesting her services to the one she sent to him yesterday. I collected all the messages into a file and continued looking for something else. Their hard drive contained the usual family junk that was completely uninteresting except for the photos. He and his wife seemed to have the perfect marriage. They were both attractive people with beautiful children. They even had a golden retriever. He looked happy. Vacation photos showed a typical middle-class family doing ordinary things. I wondered what would motivate a man with such a life to hunt another man's wife. It was probably just the excitement of the hunt. You spend your bachelor years racking up points, and some men just can't grow up, even after they made a commitment to marriage. When I go through other people's computers, my first target is encrypted information. People don't encrypt data unless they want to keep it secret. Therefore, for a hacker, encryption is like blood on water for a shark. I searched the file system, and of course, found one encrypted folder. I needed to remove the physical memory to recover the key, but I cracked his virtual safe in 5 hours. My heart sank when I realized that Janet was probably with that bastard right now while I was doing the decoding. I set aside the previously encrypted folder next to his messages to Janet. Then I did a simple query on his file system using all the keywords I could think of. Nothing else was found. First, I looked at the emails. They started 3 months ago with a regular business request and messages for getting to know each other. Then the tone changed. He apparently met her at lunch and liked what he saw. She was absolutely professional in organizing the work, but he was already beginning to lean towards seduction. I can't believe she didn't see this. But on the other hand, Janet has a carefree attitude towards men. I think if you looked like her, you wouldn't care either. The terms of the agreement were typical for her. She did the financial work, and he interacted with the client. The messages crossed the line into flirting around the 33rd message. Then they quickly descended into downright suggestiveness on his side. His messages were long and personal. There was no explicit sexual content, but words like friendly and close friend began to appear. Perhaps things have not yet come to physical contact, but they were becoming too close emotionally, at least that's what he thought. Then I finally found it. This was the 44th message out of 50. There was no what or why, just, you forced me. What we did has never happened before and will never happen again. I love my husband and value my marriage too much for that. You caught me off guard. That's the only reason you pushed me over the line. I'm so ashamed. I will fulfill my business obligations, but don't ever touch me again. The timestamp coincided with a trip to Atlanta. What happened next was exactly what I expected from a guy like Reynolds. He was both persuaded and intimidated. On the one hand, he constantly reminded Janet of their close friendship. He even went so far as to tell her that he loved her and that he would leave his wife and children for her. The part that broke my heart was the part where he told her what a great lover she was and that he had never experienced sex like this before. The smug grin clearly showed between the lines. He also pointed out that they have a contract. She did not believe any of his many protestations of love, but fell for the bait of the contract. He threatened a major lawsuit if she violated the terms of their agreement. And of course, the reason for breaking the contract would have to come out in court, which meant I would have found out about it. 2 messages to go, she finally agreed to another consultation, but she told him that she would be staying at another hotel and that she would only meet him at the client's office. The message she sent yesterday read, we'll meet at Flagler at 10 o'clock. We have to finish today. I sat down and teared up a little before moving on to the transcribed information. She was my whole life, and she betrayed me with that smug bastard. But that only happened once. She claimed that she was forced and clearly regretted it. Maybe I could live with it, maybe I could pretend it never happened. I really understood the circumstances. It looks like Reynolds somehow turned on Janet. And I knew from years of happy experience that she became completely irrational when this happened. In fact, I was sure that Mr. Reynolds had had quite a busy night. In public, Janet was poised and reserved, but in the bedroom she was a fiery cauldron of pure passion. And if you manage to touch these passions, she will be absolutely ruthless until she is satisfied. How Reynolds turned her on remained a mystery. She knew she had hot blood. Therefore, she would never allow a man to get close enough to turn her on with the exception of a physical attack. It seems that this is what happened. I like to think that I am an adult, and I understand that life has its dark moments, times when we do stupid and self-destructive things. The whole point is to avoid long-term consequences from any regrettable behavior. Sex was understandable if everything happened as described in the letter. It looked like a one-time situation and very close to coercion. Her reaction was exactly what I would have expected from her, and it would be easily forgiven if that were the case. All logic told me that there was no reason for her to lie, since it would never have occurred to either of them that I would read this message. So I was pretty sure I could put up with something she was forced to participate in the first place. even if she was a willing participant in much of the process itself. The problem was that if I didn't put a tracking collar on her, I would never be able to trust her again. I reminded myself that she had been beautiful for the past month, and if she could hide something like that once, she could do it again. So we needed to talk about it, and she had to provide me with some satisfactory explanation for not sharing this with me. I could think of several good reasons, most notably that it would be embarrassing for her and painful for me. But I needed to hear it from her. Meanwhile, I opened another folder. This was a personal correspondence between Reynolds and the client. It immediately became clear that the client was a consortium of high-level drug dealers with Latin American roots who were interested in money laundering in the United States. There was nothing in the correspondence to indicate where the connection was made, but it was obvious that Reynolds was creating shell companies through which the money would flow, and he needed Janet's expertise to create a financial structure. In her defense, it was also obvious that Janet did not know the source of the money, only that there was a lot of it, and it was foreign. This also explained why Reynolds used a large hammer to force her to work on the case. One would imagine that his clients would not be very understanding if he suddenly had problems with staff. In fact, bringing in another financial advisor in the middle of a transaction would certainly have been very dangerous to Mr. Reynolds' health. My brain was now in a dead end. She cheated on me, and it was killing me. But she only did it once, clearly regretted it, and did everything possible to get out of the situation in her favor. But what about all the flirting and teasing leading up to it? What did this mean? She was always flirty, even right in front of me. It never amounted to anything. It's just her nature. She is a beautiful woman, and beautiful women have a fundamental need to be admired. Otherwise, there would be no fashion industry. Maybe she didn't realize that the teasing was different in this case. What was much worse was that she created financial channels for very bad people. But she didn't know this. However, thanks to Reynolds, her participation put her in mortal danger. These were the people who didn't like open cases. It was evening. But I had to call her. I wanted to warn her to get her out of this situation immediately. I expected an answering machine, but a man answered. My heart sank. It must be him. I had an image of a phone lying next to their sweaty naked bodies in some hotel room in Miami. The voice said, "Hello, who is it?" I almost hung up, but instead I just stared at the phone. The voice said, "This is the FBI. I need you to introduce yourself." I quickly ended the call. Then I activated the wiretap on her phone. Several male voices were heard. One holding the phone said, "Her husband just called." Another voice, clearly in command, said, "Then you should call him back." And my phone rang. This time I answered. The voice said, "This is Special Agent Mark Schneider. I'm with the FBI. We need to talk to you about your wife. We'll be at your house in 3 hours, and I want you to be available." There was no "please" or "if it's convenient." Just be there. He hung up. If my mind had been in turmoil before, now it was moving at superluminal speeds. FBI? What could Janet have gotten herself into? Some people may be nervous, but I react to stress by sleeping. I went into the bedroom, lay down fully clothed on the covers, and slept for 2 of the next 3 hours. I took another shower to wake up and tried to eat something. And I was more or less functional when 3 very grim-looking guys knocked on my front door later that evening. The 3 tried to look compassionate. Because they were FBI agents, they looked more formal and bored than sympathetic. I worked a lot with FBI agents, and always wondered if the pin in their ass was standard equipment or an aftermarket item. We went through the usual identification ritual, and 3 of them sat down with me. They have a protocol for this, and they followed the book. Unfortunately, I read this book and knew why they were there. It was a visit to a survivor. The man, who was clearly the lead agent, put on a fake face of sympathy and said, "I'm sorry to tell you that your wife Janet died today. Please accept our condolences." I knew this would happen, but his words still blew up all my internal systems. "Dead. She can't be dead. I must have been sitting there like a zombie because finally the lead agent said, "Mr. Witcher." I looked at him, and even he was shocked by the pain and devastation he saw. I said, "What? How?" He said, "She found herself in a shootout between members of the Miami cartel. She was in the office of one of the cartel leaders when another group broke in and killed everyone inside. 6 people were killed. One of them was your wife. We believe she was in the wrong place at the wrong time." I knew it wasn't true, but he couldn't reveal his cards without risking his own experience with the Klingon interrogator. Still, my emotions were real as I burst into sobs. The agents looked puzzled. Being courageous men, they are not used to such effeminate behavior. Between sobs, I said, "What do I do now?" He said, "We are organizing the funeral. We want to spare your feelings. It was pretty bad." Pretty bad doesn't begin to describe it. I started the day suspecting my wife of cheating, and by the end of the day, she was dead, so dead that the FBI couldn't even let me see her. The shock just turned everything off. I felt a wave of nausea, and darkness fell. The next thing I remember was being in a hospital bed, hooked up to a bunch of machines. A friendly nurse stood over me. She said, "Welcome back, Mr. Wither. You scared us." I said, "Where am I? What happened?" She said, "You had a little blood pressure incident yesterday. It was more psychological than physical, but the FBI agents who brought you in thought it was a heart attack. We've kept you sedated for the last 24 hours. Then it hit me again. Janet, dead. The machine that was monitoring my heart went crazy. The nurse grabbed the syringe, and I blessedly fell asleep again. I was healthy enough to attend her funeral. It was a beautiful spring day. My whole soul was long ago torn out by cruel fate. I was an automaton. Her parents and our few friends were there, just like my parents. They were all sympathetic. We returned to my home in Georgetown for the funeral dinner. Then everyone left, and I was left alone without her for the first time in 15 years. It was absolutely terrifying. 6 long years passed, and my heart still hurt as much as the day it happened. I was emotionless most of the time, except for occasional bouts of uncontrollable crying. I didn't care about life. I lived completely alone. Nobody saw me. I missed Janet so much it hurt. At 44, I had no interest in replacing her. Once you've experienced life on intimate terms with a woman like Janet, everyone else pales in comparison. Buster and I led a monastic life. I also had absolutely no social life. My friends abandoned me a long time ago. I didn't blame them. I was a melancholy piece of shit. I knew she had cheated, but this fact had minimal emotional impact compared to the devastating effect of her death. Any pain I might have felt from her betrayal compared to the indescribable impact of her subsequent death was like comparing the impact of a conventional bombing to the release of a 50-megaton nuclear device. Same concept, but significantly different scale. An exposure to the latter completely destroyed any residual effects of the former. There was no doubt that we loved each other, and I already knew all the circumstances surrounding what happened, so I was confident that we would eventually find some way forward. But her sudden and complete removal from my life was a completely different story. There was no way forward from this, and there was no recovery from the death of someone you loved as much as I loved my wife. It was simply too much to bear. Perhaps I could spend the next 6 years wreaking havoc in cyberspace to vent my feelings of rage and cosmic injustice. But instead, my goal was to become completely invisible. I didn't want to anger the deity who had sent this to me, because maybe he decided I needed another lesson to strengthen my understanding. The fear of thinking that someone at the top is just waiting for the right moment to drop the other shoe makes you very righteous, and it's exhausting. Of course, all the work and no play made me quite wealthy, but it wasn't about the money. I was driven absolutely forced by work. I became wild. I spent all my time on the road just Buster, and I constantly moving from one thing to another. My nomadic life was a side effect of my mental state. I couldn't calm down. I knew that if I stopped working, I would realize how meaningless my life was. Thanks to the Black Hat community, There is always a demand for talented white hats. So I spent a lot of time driving into western cities like Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven, beaten down and just as frustrated. I had duels at noon and was moving on to the next skirmish. Staying at the motel was a complete pain in the ass, and there was always a problem with Buster questioning any pet-friendly policy. Most of these places think about the customer with a cheerful Yorkie, not a muscular beast that looks like a hellhound and constantly drools and smells. So I sold our old house in Georgetown and spent $350,000 on a brand new '43 Integra motorhome. After that, Buster and I traveled in luxury. We wandered around the country depending on where the case was. It was a nomadic way of life, but it suited my alienation from the human race perfectly. I've never been a part of any place. That's why Buster and I were parked at Tombstone Territories RV Park one February day. It was ironic. Given what I do, I knew I would end up at Tombstone. The town of Sierra Vista is a charming little place. It is located in the high plains of Arizona. But I wasn't a high plateau drifter like Eastwood. I was there to conduct a sneak attack on Fort Huachuca. This is the main U.S. Army Network Technology Center, even though it is located in old Apache territory. Like Cochise, I was interested in seeing if I could destroy the place. Sierra Vista has a population of about 45,000 people, which may seem small in that part of Arizona. But there are about 18,000 people at the base. Therefore, it seems that the city belongs to the Army. Since this was a covert operation, I had contact at the base. He was a bright, optimistic fighter with the look of a West Point graduate. I charge a client up to $250,000 for one of these cases. However, they can be a little dangerous. I was about to commit a criminal act that could get me shot and definitely sent to prison for years. If only I didn't have a get-out-of-jail-free pass from the Pentagon. Major Charlie Rafferty was that pass. Of course, we had to meet secretly. So that Friday, we met at a place called Linda's. Linda's is a typical off-base bar that claims to have the most beautiful barmaids in Tombstone territory. They serve some pretty decent Four Peaks beer, so Rafferty and I each had 20 ounces of beer in front of us as we discussed the rules. I was mostly on my own with penetration. The purpose of the exercise was to count the Koopas at the 9th Signal Ask Network Control Center. This was an old Indian concept of warfare where the point was to physically touch your opponent in battle rather than kill him. However, if I had successfully counted the Koopas, the army would have been in deep shit. At least, that was the idea. I didn't expect any problems getting over the majority of their standard protections. But when I get to their main areas, I might encounter something I can't get around. So Charlie was there to help me out if I got into trouble. I didn't tell him about my plans other than entering. The reason is that I still didn't know what I was going to do. I need to explore the nooks and crannies to find vulnerabilities. We talked while Charlie eyed the barmaids. He was a single 32-year-old guy, and I didn't blame him. If I were not completely emasculated by life, I would also look at them. They were really very attractive. Then a woman came through the door. She was with a group of secretaries from the base. I don't know what attracted me to her, but it was like seeing an oasis of cool, sparkling water in the middle of the Sahara. I could almost hear heavenly music. After 6 years without feeling, I was fascinated. She had long blonde hair, huge blue eyes, and a deep golden Arizona tan. Her tan contrasted perfectly with her elegant white silk blouse and formal pencil skirt. She looked a little older than the other women, but her body was excellent. I confess that I am fascinated by beautiful large breasts. Janet had amazing breasts, and honestly, this is something I absolutely need if I ever want to test the car, so to speak. This new woman had exactly the same perfect breasts as Janet, and suddenly, after 6 years of inactivity, I felt excited. Charlie noticed my look and said, "She's gorgeous, isn't she? But you can forget about her. She's an ice queen. She'd make the princess from Frozen look easy to get." Entire brigades of infantry tried to woo her, and her answer is always, "Leave me alone." I tried it myself, and she acted as if I didn't exist. She never goes out. Either she has the most powerful sex toy in the world, or she loves women. I looked at the woman. I watched the animation and good humor that played on her very smart face as she interacted with the group, and the mice began to gnaw at my brain. I felt like I knew her. Of course, it was a base specializing in what I do, and since she was clearly a civil servant, I might have met her somewhere else. But the feeling didn't go away. Even more amazingly, I was fascinated by her. I haven't noticed a single woman since Janet's death, let alone wanted to talk to one. So my reaction was truly a miracle, no pun intended. Did Janet have a long-lost sister or cousin? The double resembled Janet so much that I had to run away as quickly as possible. The deep feeling of longing and regret was like slowly peeling away a scab from a wound. I threw a couple of 20s on the table and jumped out. On the way out, I told Charlie that the next time he would hear from me was when I announced that I owned their systems, or that he should call Marshall Proctor. Either way, I'll be paid very well. One of the nice things about traveling from city to city is that each one has something interesting to offer. In the case of Sierra Vista, it was, and I kid you not, an annual gathering of poetry and music for the Cochise Cowboys. This is the kind of event you would expect to see in Monterey, California, not at a location less than 20 miles from OK Corral, but there it was. And it was really cool. The next morning, which was a Saturday, Buster and I wandered around the various venues. We even attended several poetry readings. That was great. The local population avoided us. This is exactly how Buster affects people, even if he just walks next to me like a little lamb. And that's when I saw her wandering in front of one of the shops in the city center. Local merchants must love the annual Cochise Cowboy Poetry and Music Gathering. She was alone, which was a crime against nature. Someone this hot should be with a man. Maybe she liked women. She wore modest, flared white shorts that showed off her magnificently toned legs. The 3-inch cork heels on her sandals made her calves look even fuller and rounder. A yellow tank top with thin straps emphasized her magnificent breasts. She radiated antisociality just like me. She seemed to be killing time by walking around the fair, which is what I was doing too. I continued to follow her, trying to remember where I had seen her before. Inexplicably, I felt the urge to actually tap her on the shoulder and ask. It was an unsettling feeling. I haven't felt the need to interact with a woman for 6 long years. In fact, during this time, I felt no emotions other than loss and grief. This new feeling was completely unexpected and somewhat alarming. Perhaps it was because she reminded me of Janet. It had exactly the same general configuration, but all the details were different. This one had long, thick blonde hair. Janet's hair was brown and cut into a neat bob that literally screamed MBA from Stanford. This one had blue eyes and perfect features, just like Janet. But Janet was Italian, and this one looked like an ex-California beach bunny. Finally, I approached her from behind. I just wanted to politely ask where we might have met before. She whirled around with that annoyed look women get when they think they're being watched. So, I wasn't so secretive after all. I saw in her eyes, "Get away, you pervert." Then her eyes widened. She let out a small squeal of horror. She covered her face with her hands and ran away at full speed. I've been rejected by women before, but there has never been a woman acting as if Satan himself had materialized in front of her. It was completely confusing. I said, "Buster, stay here." He said in his deep, booming voice, "Whatever you say, boss." And he sat down. I chased after the mysterious woman. She ran toward the parking lot as if she were being pursued by Cochise and his entire band of renegade Apaches. She almost made it to her car. But remember, I'm a runner. She turned to face me, her chest heaving with passion. And at that moment, I knew who she is. But my brain was telling my eyes that they were completely wrong. Did I really have some kind of stroke? I thought ghosts only appeared at night. She was breathing, actually suffocating. I said hesitantly, "Janet?" What can you say when the person you've mourned every minute of your life for the last 6 years suddenly shows up in a lonely cowboy town in Arizona. She said with real fear in her voice, "Davy, you need to get out of here." I was still processing information that my brain thought was wrong. Therefore, my speech was limited to monosyllabic words. I said, "Why?" She said anxiously, "Because your life is in danger." My brain still hasn't returned to normal. Again I said, "Why?" Janet said, "Because I have angered some very bad people. And if they find out that Janet Witcher is still alive, they will kill me and everyone associated with me. The only thing that has protected you so far is that they think I'm dead." Then her features softened, and she covered her face with her hands and began to sob. "I did it to keep you alive, darling. You must forget you ever saw me." Suddenly, everything fell into place. Drug dealer, financial planning, FBI, and closed casket everything. She was in the witness protection program. Stumbling upon her by chance in Sierra Vista might seem completely implausible, but it wasn't as if it was a 1 in 300 million chance. Fort Huachuca is a very small place. Perhaps neither she nor her handlers thought about this, but she worked in the only place in the entire country where I was almost guaranteed to end up. Perhaps there was some kind of subconscious desire here. I didn't know the details, but I knew that I would never lose her again in my life. I said, "Perhaps the marshal is somewhere around now." Still sobbing, she said, "No, enough time has passed that I just have to report to them every month." I said, "So no one in this immediate area knows that we know each other?" She wiped her eyes and said through her sobs, "Probably not. I've been dead long enough that they seem to have forgotten about me. But we can't communicate or someone will put two and two together sooner or later." I said, "Listen, I'd rather be dead than spend another second without you. There has to be a way. Can't we go somewhere and talk?" I could see the emotional war going on inside her. It was obvious that she wanted this to happen more than she wanted to stay alive. She looked around furtively and said, "Where are you staying? Perhaps I can visit you there." I'm an expert in covert operations, and one of the rules of good operative work is to make the lie bold. So I told her, "Listen, I'm a widower and you're a hot woman. So why don't you just go back to the place you so unceremoniously left, and I'll take you like the lonely cowboy that I am." It wouldn't be unusual for a guy like me to want a little local fun. She looked at me with that look. It's the look that never fails to melt the soles of my boat shoes. I saw her weighing the odds in her head. She then smiled in acceptance and said, "Great idea, cowboy. See you in a couple of minutes. Remember, you'll have to buy me breakfast." She turned and walked, swaying her hips, her tight white shorts highlighting her gorgeous ass. I missed that. I missed her ass. Buster and I got there 25 minutes later. I said, "Hi, let me introduce myself. I'm Davy Witcher, and this is my old friend Buster. We're not local." She looked sentimental. I said that. She said, "You still have Buster." I said, "Who are you more excited to see, him or me?" She said, "Of course he is, stupid." And she lightly touched my arm in that flirtatious way that all women indicate interest. I also missed that fantastic sense of humor. To anyone watching, it looked like the guy and his dog were about to have sex. I said loud enough for the people around us to hear, "Well, maybe I should buy you a drink. I have a house north of Huachuca City." Stupid line, I know, but just what it takes to convince people that I'm horny and she's the local slut. Then it dawned on me that her name was not Janet. I said, "By the way, what's your name?" She said, "Janie Winslow is at your service, good sir." It's smart to keep the name close to avoid mistakes. We talked the whole way to my car, and she was flirty. I drive a car behind my RV to use for local transportation, but that doesn't mean she has to be sad. Mine is a Mini Cooper John Cooper Works with 230 horses under the hood. This is a convertible, so we flew out of town. Buster sat majestically in the small back seat, his ears and tongue flapping in the wind behind him like flags on a clipper ship. It was a 15-minute ride at 100 miles per hour. There wasn't much to talk about because it was difficult to hear one's own thoughts over the roar of the tuned exhaust pipes and the noise of the wind. We parked and Buster went about his business. We stood together at the door of the mobile home and looked at him. My heart was pounding and my emotions were racing like the Atlantic in a hurricane. All I heard was the little voice in my head screaming, "She's alive." But I said as calmly as I could, "So what do you do, Janie?" It was just a way to continue the act while I pulled myself together. She said, "I am one of the lead auditors in the Base Logistics Command. I perform simple audit and control tasks as a GS-14. This was a gross underestimation of talent, but it kept her under the radar. Buster finally finished, and I opened the door. Janet walked in, followed by Buster, who headed towards his food bowl. I stepped behind her and closed the door. I turned, and she threw herself at me, sobbing as if her heart was broken. She raised her face to me, and we had one of those hot tongue kisses that only Janet can give. 6 long years melted away as if they had never existed. I picked her up, still kissing her, and walked 30 feet along the length of the car to the bedroom in the back. I threw her on the bed. We were two animals. Having completed our absolute need for each other, it was time to talk. She spent a lot of time on the toilet. When she came out, we had 2 cups of chamomile tea. She sat down in the dining booth across from me. Of course, we had a lot to talk about. I said, "Before you say anything, I need to tell you what I know." She looked terrible, as if that was the last thing she expected to hear. But she understood what I meant. You could see the shame and pain flash in her eyes. She was completely shocked. Then she concentrated. She said, "I probably shouldn't ask how you knew, but I still don't understand." I said, "I overheard something in Chicago that made me suspicious, so I opened the book, which was by Whitley Reynolds. I know you slept with him, and I know about the money laundering. I also tapped your phone, but when I used the bug, the only thing I knew was that you were dead." She looked sad and ashamed and said, "He screwed me the second time when we were in Atlanta. It was the usual story. I drank a little more than I should have, and up until that point he seemed like nothing more than a good friend. I trusted him." I said, "I know, I've read all your letters." She blushed, then paled, but continued, "So you know he got to me the same way you did when we first met. I considered him a friend first and foremost. I would have noticed an attempt at seduction, but there was no such thing. It was an interaction between 2 colleagues, perhaps the best word is flirting. I thought it was harmless. I thought to myself, I'd call this emotional cheating. But the situation for both of us was now completely different. We lived separately for 6 years, and during this time our views and perspectives changed greatly, especially when you think the other person is dead. She said, "I didn't expect him to attack me. I wasn't so drunk that I didn't know what I was doing, but my guard was down. It seemed natural to go to his room to review plans for the next day. As soon as he closed the door, he pounced. It was an attack at the beginning. I struggled for probably another 10 seconds. That really lit my fire, and from that moment on, it was a conscious act. This went on for a while, and I actually gave him the sex of my life that night. It wasn't something I planned, or I would have done it voluntarily at first. Afterwards, I was deeply remorseful and ashamed. I knew what I had done. I am not that person. I chose wrong. I have no excuses, and I am truly sorry." She stopped and looked at me sadly. She said, "The guilt crushed me. Whether you ever found out about it or not, I will always know about it." She completely destroyed my self-image. Then, to add to my humiliation, he began to parade me around like a trophy. I guess with what I did, I deserved it. The next day, we had to work together as always. Maybe it was a little cold, but we had a job to do. I then headed out to dinner alone after we were done with the client. I specifically chose a restaurant in another hotel because I thought he would never find me there. Of course, it was a challenge. He searched until he found me, and then he sat down at the table as if I belonged to him. He enjoyed the power and tested how I would react. I wanted to pour my soup on his head. But it was a very public place, so I decided to just sit and watch him bluff. You know me, polite to the extreme. It was a mistake because soon his friend showed up and the idiot immediately started showing off. I just sat there and was quietly angry. I planned to take revenge as soon as my friend left. At this point, I interrupted and said, I overheard a friend talking about you while he was in Chicago. He said that you were completely in love with the guy and that you two had sex regularly. She grimaced and said, he only dreamed about it. He actually followed me to my room and tried to do the same thing. I even flirted with him a little to encourage him to do it. But this time I was ready. You could hear him screaming throughout the hotel. I laughed at him, pushed him out into the corridor, and locked the door. But the fact remained that I was forced to work with him until the project was completed. I said, I know all this. I saw you trying to break the connection. It might have worked in your favor when we had the conversation we needed to have when you got back from Miami. She looked relieved and said, then you obviously read what I sent him after that. It sounded like I was in love with him and slept with him regularly. I nodded my head, no, with an ironic smile on my face. She continued, you also know that I planned to stay at a different hotel on my last visit to emphasize my position towards him. I really thought you'd never know. And of course, I never knew that you knew. I'm telling you the truth, and I'm sure you believe it. I knew she was telling the truth. I have read their correspondence probably 1,000 times over the past 6 years, and every possible interpretation I could make matched what she told me. But I had another question. This was the only pressing question, or it would have been if we had been able to talk when she returned from Miami. I said, how could you be so indifferent to me after that? There was not the slightest hint of guilt. That was my main concern. Since you are such a good actress, how can I trust you not to lie to me again? She frowned and said, part of me wants to tell you to just pull yourself together. Obviously, I behaved this way towards you, and it was very difficult to do to protect you from the consequences of my poor judgment. I knew you would be hurt, no matter what the true motive was, so I took it upon myself. It was easier to do because I knew I would never let that happen again. She stopped and looked at me challengingly. She challenged me to doubt her words. She could keep her feelings under control because she never intended to let this happen again. This was typical of Janet. She may have been small, but she was as hard as adamantium. She could play normal as long as needed. I still wasn't sure how I felt about being lied to, but that wasn't a problem after what happened after that. She read my thoughts. Her gaze softened, and she took one of my hands in both of hers. She looked deeply into my eyes and added, all that aside, the part of me that loves you madly and always has just wants to tell you that I will never betray you again, and that I will spend every day of the rest of my life assuring you in his devotion. And there will no longer be a need to lie to you in this way. I learned an object lesson that night one I will never forget, and this benefited me over the next 6 years. I know I suffered from trusting men too much, but now, having been burned once, be careful twice. Over the past 6 years, I've turned down every potential suitor because I felt like I owed you, even though I knew you thought I was dead and that I would never see you again. I know this sounds crazy, but it was part of my personal repentance, and if you don't believe it, check with the base. Thanks to Major Rafferty, I didn't have to do that. She leaned back, looked at me with a wry smile and said, so choose your answer. Which answer do you like best? I smiled back at her and said, I'll take door number 2. Moreover, that other woman was someone named Janet Whitcher. She died 5 years ago, and I barely knew Janie Winslow. 6 years is a long time, and I think Janie Winslow learned a lot during that time. I know you're not the same. She looked at me with the most amazing expression on her face. It was pure joy and relief. She said, with all my heart. 2 days later, I called my contact Charlie at the Netcom/9th Army Signal Command Operations Center. This led to an intense 3-week session during which I explained to them where all the vulnerabilities were. They then wrote me a big check, and I went to the DMV on Charleston Road to get my new driver's license. I stopped at the rental mailbox on base to pick up our new passport, credit cards, and social security documents. Sarah and Buster were waiting for me when I returned to the mobile home. Over the past 3 weeks, Janie Winslow suddenly left the Army and disappeared to an unknown location. There were records that she might have moved to Maine, but there was no forwarding address. Records of her participation in the Witness Protection Program have completely disappeared as if it never happened. Her supervising marshal was transferred. Janie Winslow was now as much a ghost as Janet Witcher. This was one of my easier feats. There is an almost subtle injection command flaw in the Justice Department's Human Resources portal code. Perhaps someday my company will tell them where it is. It took some time to find the right personalities, but once I found 2 suitable ones, it was a matter of seconds to steal them. William Weston was aboard Air France 447 when it crashed into the Atlantic. He was 37 years old. His 38-year-old widow, Sarah Weston, died in a car accident in Cleveland that same year. I must admit that it took a little time for Janie to disappear from all government records. But faking your death was as easy as shelling pears. I only needed to trust one person. But my little brother was always someone I could count on. And of course, the company that my brother was forced to take over after my tragic death was still making a lot of money. Therefore, he had a great financial interest in keeping me deadors. So one death notice and a secret channel counting in the Caymans later, Bill Weston, his wife Sarah, and their dog got into their luxury motorhome and left the Tombstone area. It's no coincidence that the theme from the Magnificent Seven played in the background as they rode off into the sunset. We were sitting under a canopy on the deck of our Hylas 70 yacht in Porto di Bacoli. It was one of those classic late summer days in Campania. The sun was hot and the sea breeze was refreshing. We were in Naples because we were doing a tour of the Falerno wineries and trying a bottle of Falerno del Masico, which has a pedigree going back to the famous Falernian wines of ancient Rome. Almost 10 years have passed, and we have stopped looking over our shoulders. I've set up traps in various government and commercial systems that will alert me if anyone starts investigating Bill or Sarah Weston. But so far there was no sound, and if there ever is, I have a million rabbit holes we can disappear down. We live in Cortona, and yes, I know it's a cliché thanks to Francis Mays. My brother has grown the company to the point where I don't worry about money, and the Italian hill town is the last place anyone would expect to see the late Dave and Janet Witcher. We have a big boat that I keep in Civitavecchia, and we spend most of our time visiting every interesting or historical place we can think of in the Mediterranean. And every day of our life together gets better and better. At 54, Janet is just as beautiful as she was at 23. And she still attracts the eyes of every man in the room. This is Italy, and Italian men appreciate a hot woman of any age. But I was never attracted to her gorgeous body. I was attracted to her powerful intellect and sense of values, and these qualities only intensified with age. Although she is still flirtatious, she has become a person with a keen understanding of what it means to be human. You can understand a lot in 16 years, and 6 of them spent believing that the other person is forever lost, shape the marriage and life prospects into something approaching wisdom. I never doubted her love for me, and now I don't doubt her decisions. Deep down, you always know when you are right and when you are wrong. Sometimes it takes courage to act on that knowledge. And Janet is strong enough for this. There will never be any problems. What about me? Well, maybe I finally understand the plan. Shit happens. And when this happens, you either start digging or you get buried. Carpe diem is not just a local expression. This is a way to take control of your destiny. Remember this the next time you overhear something in a bar. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.